Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Secular Jihadists for Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me is Armin Navabi.
Hello.
Welcome, everybody. So this is going to be a fun little episode. So this is something I've been interested in for a very long time. As you know, this podcast is mainly focused on issues of Islam and Muslims. But recently, with a lot of current events that have been happening here, like we think of the U.S. as, with the First Amendment, separation of religion and state, we think, okay, Christianity and state are completely separate, church and state are completely separate, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a whole lot of influence. And the organization, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is the largest organization in the United States that advocates for non-theists and atheists in the U.S., does a lot of work in trying to make sure that wall between church and state remains separate. And it actually is quite a bit of work because there's a lot of push and pull where people want to have influence on the affairs of the state. So we're actually very happy to have with us today a representative from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He is a constitutional and civil rights attorney. This is Andrew Seidel. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, it's our honor. And so Andrew essentially works to ensure that the government obeys the First Amendment and that Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state remains tall and impregnable. Build that wall.
Exactly.
I just want to stress how big of a deal this is. Every time you see a case in the United States where people are when government and religion is getting mixed, you always see Freedom from Religion Foundation. It's always there. It's always there first to show up to. So what you guys are doing there, basically you are at the front lines of making sure religion doesn't creep into people's.
Yeah. This is real frontline activism. And, you're actually working. And it's run by Dan Barker. Dan Barker, I'm a massive fan of Dan Barker. If you go online, you can check out his debates just in terms of, him with theists. He's also done a debate, I think, with a Muslim group once that I saw online that I really liked. So he's done quite a bit of work. So what we're going to try to talk about today is, probably go a little bit into the history of secularism in the United States, how Christianity and Christian fundamentalism still tries to influence American politics and sometimes does so successfully. Recently, we've had a lot of events like the Masterpiece Cakeshop controversy, where you had the people at a bakery who were running a bakery who refused to bake a cake for same-sex wedding. So that's been an interesting case that the Supreme Court ruled on recently. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And also the retirement of Justice Anthony Kennedy and his replacement. Right now he's nominated, Brett Kavanaugh, and we're going to see if, how that changes a court and how that changes the influence of religion in U.S. politics. And finally, we are going to talk about America's historical approach to Islam and Muslims, as well as its current approach. As we know, there's a lot of activity there.
I actually wanted to ask a lot of questions about that as well.
We're definitely going to get to that.
Yeah.
So before we start, though, Andrew, I wanted to congratulate you. I know that you guys had a huge win this week at the Ninth Circuit Court. This is a court that's right under the Supreme Court. And what the Freedom from Religion Foundation did with the help of Andrew is they stopped a school board that had been taken over by a mega church. So they were basically trying to teach religion in school, and they were able to stop them. according to this court ruling. So congratulations on that. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But before we start, just a little bit about you. How did you get started in this? How did you get interested in it? And what motivated you to do the work that you do now?
That's a story that starts for me back in law school. Obviously in law school, you learn about all kinds of areas of law, but you also learn a lot about the Constitution and the First Amendment. And while I was studying abroad, I was studying international law in Amsterdam, human rights law, looking at international crimes. We studied at the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. I actually started reading The God Delusion. And that kind of I was never a believer, but that sort of coincidence between becoming an out atheist and an ardent atheist, and also learning about the secular history and foundations of our nation and the threats to it here in America, kind of galvanized me into looking at this particular area of law. And when I was sort of surveying the landscape, there's not many groups that do what the Freedom from Religion Foundation does. There's a few of us, and I know all the attorneys who are in it. And when I started, there was like 5 of us.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was really into also environmental law, and I actually concentrated on that for a good bit in law school. But, there's hundreds of thousands of lawyers doing that, and there are 20 of us who do state-church separation. So I'm having a much bigger impact, and I love the work so much. It's so much fun to get up in the morning.
But can you start with, for a lot of our international audience?
Sure.
A lot of our audience members are in Muslim majority countries, so I think this is going to be particularly enlightening for them. So the First Amendment, they usually think of the way it's portrayed as about free speech and free expression. Mm-hmm. But there is language in there about separation of church and state. So can you explain the First Amendment for people who may not know about it?
Sure. Details? So
just to be clear, this is something that we in Canada are very jealous of you guys having.
It's pretty special. We're big fans of it here. So first of all, there's the U.S. Constitution, right? And this lays out how our government works and the relationship between the people and the government and religion and the government. And the original Constitution only mentions religion once, and that is to prohibit religious tests for public office. So that was kind of the first way that the framers of our Constitution started to build this wall of separation between state and church. They said, no more are we going to force people to profess a belief in a God or in a particular God to hold a spot in our government. Right? You can believe whatever you want, and you can still be a member of our government. So that was a huge step forward. And then a couple of years later, they thought, you know what, we need to actually reinforce this a little bit. So they passed an amendment to the Constitution. And they passed 10 actually. And what most of them do is they lay out certain rights that you have. So the First Amendment actually lays out 6 different rights. It says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition their government for a redress of grievances. Sorry. So 6 different rights are protected in there. And it's those first 2 clauses, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that really built up the wall of separation to the level that we see today. And that is why we have both the freedom of religion and a government that is free from religion.
But it doesn't say freedom from religion other than in government, right? Does it say any? Yeah.
It says shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Right. And so it doesn't use the phrase freedom from religion. But if you think about it, you can't actually have freedom of religion unless your government is free from religion. Unless you have a secular government, the true freedom of religion can't really exist. And that's because the government has so much power over your everyday life that if it is suggesting even that you worship a certain way or that you believe a certain way, that suggestion is then, given the power and voice of all the people who are.
But a lot of believers will say just because it says freedom of religion and not from religion, that means everyone is protected except atheists or not the non-religious. Yeah.
Yes, and that was actually an argument that was made in this country for quite a while as well. It's an argument that was rejected because without the freedom to dissent fully, without the freedom to reject religion, there is no real freedom of religion too. Another way to think about this is in freedom of speech, right? You have the freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean you have to talk. The freedom of speech includes the right not to say anything, just as the freedom of religion includes the right not to exercise any religion at all. Even
the not being able to establish a state religion, I mean, that in itself is also pretty powerful, because that means that in public schools, in public institutions, in government offices, you can't have displays of, you have those things. People wanted to display the 10 Commandments, for instance, in a lot of government buildings, and that's been taken down, time and time again.
A lot of people think atheists in the U.S. are complaining too much. Like they say, look, there are atheists in Bangladesh that are being hacked to death. In Saudi Arabia, they get beheaded. In Iran, they get hanged. And you guys are complaining about a fucking cross in the public, like a nativity scene. Like, just let them have their fucking nativity scene. Like, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think one of the reasons that we don't have a lot of problems like that any longer is because America was the first nation to separate state and church, and we did it so long ago. It was a huge step forward in terms of human rights, but also in terms of political science. It had never been tried before. No government ever to exist had completely said, religion, you're over there, government, you're over here, and you guys take care of your stuff, we'll take care of our stuff. That had never happened before. And when you give religion, which is by its nature not based on reason, the power of the government, it can impose and it can wield, the army and all the violence that comes with the law to
this is
hurt people.
Yeah, this is so this is the kind of a segue into what I wanted to get into with the history of it. So like you're saying that, this was actually never done before. But, you have the counter argument from the conservatives, that the religious conservatives that say that, well, the United States was founded on Judeo-Christian values. But the thing is that if it was founded on Judeo-Christian values, why didn't they just say that in the First Amendment? Why did they go all the way into trying to say no establishment of a state? And, in the Treaty of Tripoli, that was another thing. Let's not get into, I don't want to get too technical, but it said that the United States is in no way a Christian nation, right? So that reinforces that. So is it, what did the founding fathers think? What is the history of it? Was it in reaction to the theocracies of Europe around that time? I know that Thomas Jefferson is also thought of as an Enlightenment thinker, which was also a struggle against religious theocracy and orthodoxy. So where did this come from? Why this original initiative by the founding fathers in the United States to try and push back against this?
I have a question after this one.
Okay, and you made a bunch of points in there, and we could actually talk about that question for the entire rest of the show, and I'd be happy. I won't do that to you. So just a few points first. So in terms of the Judeo-Christian principles, that America was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. I've written a whole book on that. It's coming out in May. I don't know what it's called yet. My editor and I are talking about a title. But
that's amazing. Yeah, that's great.
It's completely debunking that idea. You mentioned the Treaty of Tripoli, and it does in fact say, our government is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion.
Can I just send a copy to Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray?
I will try to do that for sure.
Oh, no. We're going to promote the crap. And by the way, I just want to say, coming up later in this podcast, we're going to talk about the Treaty of Tripoli, because it was actually a response to Islamic jihadism.
Yeah.
So that was the U.S.'s first encounter with Islamic jihadism. So that's going to be a really fun
encounter with religion, kind of a little bit, like when it comes to
foreign religion. Yeah. The Barbies. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to get to that because that's a really, really exciting topic. How the Islamic thing really, really influenced initial U.S. policy. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So you're primarily asking though, where was this drive to separate state and church? Where did it come from? And part of it was looking at what had happened in Europe, the religious wars and division that had torn Europe apart, especially the 30 Years' War. James Madison wrote this very famous, basically, it'd probably be about 8 pages today. It's really short and worth reading. It's called The Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments. And so, this kind of goes to Armin, your question too about, what are you guys complaining about? It's a cross. This was about a 3-penny tax. So 3 cents tax on citizens of Virginia that would go to support Christian preachers. Okay. So using the taxing power of the state to support religion. And James Madison wrote this memorial and remonstrance, and it's 16 points where he lays out all the different reasons why we should keep state and church separate. And one of those is what you were talking about. It's the torrents of blood. That's the phrase he uses. Torrents of blood that have been spilled in the old world trying to reach religious conformity and uniformity. And it's not possible, of course. There's always going to be
the torrents of blood. He's talking about essentially the religious abuse in Europe at that time, right? Before that.
Yeah, and before that, and talking about, even farther back, actually, the wars, one religious sect slaughtering another religious sect, the Inquisition, all of that, what played a role, and even not just in Europe too, but even here in the United States, some of our early settlers in the Northeast United States and Massachusetts, they established these theocracies, basically. The Puritans and the Pilgrims, they came over. There's this idea that they came over for religious freedom, but that's not really accurate. They came over to establish theocracies, and the founders looked at those 150 years later and said, that was a really bad idea. Nope. We're going to go ahead and not do that.
Yeah.
Big no. Yeah, okay.
Armin, you had a question.
Yeah. Wait, what did I forget my question? Oh, yeah. So, actually, this was brought in the live chat as well. Mike is saying in the UK, we don't have a lot of the problem US has with religion, even though they have, in a lot of European countries, there is no, they have official religions. Do you think that this separation of church and state made religion in the United States become like an industry, a product, a service?
100%.
And because of the power of capitalism in the United States, it actually maybe helped it grow in such a significant way, whereas in Europe, where they still remained as official government religions, they're actually becoming more and less and less relevant. So did it backfire, this whole separation of church and state to some extent?
Well, I won't say that it backfired, but you are absolutely 100% right. And this was predicted by both James Madison, one of the founding fathers of the United States, and by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. And they essentially said that, if you do create this separation, then religion is going to be forced into a marketplace, and only the strong religions are going to survive. Only those religions that are successful at going out and getting followers and getting money are going to be the ones that actually thrive and survive. Whereas if you have a state-run religion and you can force people to pay taxes and support basically a religious monopoly, the preachers and the pastors, they grow fat, they get entitled, they expect this, they don't have to work for anything. So you do have what ends up being an apathetic population, religiously speaking. So that it seems to be this weird sort of it doesn't make sense initially, but when you actually break it down and think about it, it was predicted and what we would expect. Now, did it backfire is kind of a different question in my mind, because the purpose of separating state and church wasn't to extinguish religion. It was really to ensure. Yeah, that's exactly. So I don't think it backfired. I don't think any of the founders or the people who wrote our Constitution or First Amendment would say that it backfired. I think they would say it did exactly what it was supposed to do.
Well, it's coupled like in the First Amendment. The cool thing is that you do have freedom of religion. No restriction on the exercise thereof, as it says, and then you also have free speech. So it seems secularism, which is secularism is an anti-religion. It's just a separation of religion and state. What that does is it guarantees not only the freedom of people to practice a religion, but also the freedom of anyone to criticize it and challenge it.
Absolutely.
So, that's one of the beautiful things about it, and I think that's one of the reasons we're jealous of it too. But
can religious organizations lobby the government?
Sure. There's not the separation of influence necessarily.
So now, because they're giant industries now, they can lobby the shit out of the government. So they basically are involved with government they just came through the back door, kind of.
Kind of, but if they actually engage in lobbying the government, they lose their tax-exempt status, and they actually have to pay tax.
That's fine. You just make a church, and then you also incorporate like a company right next to it, which is separate from the church.
I mean, that's basically
Armin, have you tried to do this? This is we should start a church, a secular jihadist church. Yeah, go ahead.
No, who was it that did this? Actually, John Oliver did this. Yeah, he did. Yeah. It showed how easy it was too.
So easy.
Yeah.
And this is one of the problems, and that is kind of, I think, maybe a good area where state church separation has backfired, right. Where religion is sort of claiming to be exempt from a lot of these laws, including even the laws not necessarily about paying taxes, but even about reporting their income and their expenditures to the government, which all other charities have to do, including the Freedom from Religion Foundation, where I work. But churches themselves don't even have to report any of that information to the government. They're financial and informational black holes. We have no idea.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
No, that's actually the main difference, because whenever we say, "Oh, churches are tax exempt," there are some people who are like, "Well, yeah, every nonprofit, every charity in the US is not. Why are you guys complaining?" I'm like, no, they're tax exempt and they have to open their books to show that it's going to something that is basically a replacement for government services, right?
Precisely.
But the difference is that the churches are, the religious organizations are also tax exempt, but they don't have to show shit. They could spend it on whatever they want, and nobody could. Yeah. It's one of the big problems. And actually, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we've sued over that in the past to try to get that changed, because we think that is a violation of the separation of state and church. And we're strategizing another lawsuit on it. The first one was thrown out on procedural grounds. Basically, they said, you can't bring this lawsuit right now. So we're waiting until the appropriate time. So what is the new Trump era is going to affect your progress on all of this?
It is. Trump has been a little bit of a nightmare for state church separation.
A little bit of a nightmare.
We've actually added a couple of attorneys on staff. Our membership has grown tremendously, and we're fighting like hell. We're not going to take any of this lying down, and we're still winning. Since the beginning of 2016, FFRF in court is 16-1 now. So we've won 16 cases and we've only lost one.
Wow. So that's very impressive. Holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're kicking butt, and we're not letting Trump get away with it.
Sorry, I had a question,
sure.
And we'll go on with this the Trump thing. I have something else relating to the history of secularism in the U.S. And this is something that people around the world wonder about a lot too. Because you have separation of religion and state, but on the money it says "In God We Trust." The Pledge of Allegiance, you still have the line "Under God." Now, I know that one of those was added, I think, in 1954, and it was a response to communism, because the Soviets were there's this huge, godless, atheistic, country. It was a superpower. We were fighting against the Russians, so you had to create a contrast and say, well, we have God on our side, or whatever it was. So those things were added late, but how did that get through? Is that actually unconstitutional?
I do believe that is unconstitutional, and it has been challenged. Courts have upheld it right now, and this is one of the craziest things.
What's the reasoning that they gave to uphold it?
It's so bizarre why they did. And I have, if people are more interested in this, I wrote a very short piece that you can find on Free Thought Now, which is FFRF's blog. It's called the Christian Hypocrisy of In God We Trust, I think is what it's called, something along those lines.
Okay.
And basically, the reason courts have upheld it is because they say through the rote repetition that comes with seeing "In God We Trust" on every piece of money and repeating the Pledge of Allegiance under God every day, that those phrases have lost all their religious meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Which is ridiculous for a court to say that, right? I mean, imagine if the court
"God" has lost its religious meaning.
Yeah. So imagine if the court said, that saying the rosary, or that reading John 3:16, that famous Christian Bible verse over and over again, had lost its religious significance. There would be an uproar. But because Christians like the fact that the government is promoting their religion, they don't consider this.
But isn't it so? But where do you draw the line? So that is a kind of interesting idea because
sure.
You have Christmas. Christmas is a federal holiday, and all of that. So you could, I guess, people could argue that Christmas. A lot of people do argue that Christmas has lost its religious meaning. I know that lots of non-Christians celebrate Christmas too in North America. I know that my family did. So is it? Is that line just arbitrary, or is that something? Is it strictly defined in terms of when something has lost its religious significance? Because if it is arbitrary, then that's kind of dangerous, right?
No, it's not. I mean, this is an example of a flaw in the system where our Constitution is not working the way that it should. Right? A court should have looked at that and said, yes, this is very obviously the government trying to promote religion. It's the government stepping over the line. And they should have struck it down. They didn't. They were, for whatever reason, reluctant to, and they latched onto this idea that it had lost its religious significance as a way to avoid making an unpopular decision.
The judges are not as unbiased as they're supposed to be. Like, is that
correct?
That's
correct.
I mean, it's very obvious, isn't it?
It is a lot of its time, and it's unfortunate. But I mean, there are tons and tons of flaws in the American system, and this is just one of them. There are a lot of checks and balances to try to avoid these flaws, but they still happen. I'm fairly certain, actually, that eventually these will be struck down and taken off the money and out of the Pledge of Allegiance.
But eventually it's not good enough, because eventually there will be no religion. It's just a matter of when, right? But the thing is that, I mean, I can't, like, when you look at the careers of these judges, you think like they would know better not to let their ideology influence their decisions, but they always seem to be, like, most of them seem to be voting along the lines that you would think how they would vote based on their ideology.
Yeah,
like, what the hell?
5-4.
And like, what the hell's going? Like, what? They have, isn't? I mean, I have an easier time. I don't know. I think you would think they are masters at recognizing their own bias. You know what I mean? Like, after this, yeah. So I don't understand. Why is it not so obvious? So people like, you're a shitty judge. How could you be on the Supreme Court? And why is that life? Why is that for life? Like, that's a flaw as well. Like,
it's almost like an oligarchy. I mean, they say, well, the president is elected, so the president appoints him. So it is kind of democratic. They say the same thing
in Iran when it comes to picking the supreme leader. They're like, well, the people that elect him are elected. They're like, yeah, no, this fucking. But this is bullshit. Like, these people are not elected, and they have directly elected, and they have such a major influence in people's lives. And as soon as they're picked, you can't get rid of them. You're stuck with them until they die or just go away.
Yeah, I mean, you can get rid of them in cases of bad behavior. So if there is, if they actually do break the law or they're taking bribes or something like that, you can get rid of them. They can be impeached. But yeah, the reason the founders chose to do that, the framers of the Constitution, was to act as a check on the two elected branches. And there was a lot of debate and a lot of the points you're raising at the time, whether or not they should be. I mean, people were living, first of all, a lot less long back then, and they tended to be appointed a lot older, right? Most of the judges, so their tenures weren't as long as they are now.
The founding fathers didn't expect people to be living this long at some point, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, really, they
had like a 10-year tenure. I'm sorry.
Well, and a lot of them left too, especially the first court. A lot of them, the judges served for 2 or 3 years and they didn't like it. It wasn't a prestigious job and they bounced. But that's obviously
so
not the
Can you tell us a few of the ways that you mentioned Trump has been really bad for church-state separation? Can you give us like a few reasons why that has been so?
Sure. I mean, one of them is what we're talking about right now. He's appointing terrible, terrible judges who have specifically said that they want to tear down the wall of separation between state and church. That's one of the big ones.
They've actually said that?
Kavanaugh has actually said that.
What the fuck?
This is okay. So just for the audience, he's saying Kavanaugh is a new appointee that Trump appointed to the Supreme Court, who will most likely be confirmed.
Wait, how can you say that? He's saying I'm against the Constitution?
He's saying he says that the wall of separation between state and church is a bad metaphor based on bad history, and has all but said that he will overturn it. So, I mean, he's one vote out of 9, but there are others on there who almost certainly agree with him. It's one of the reasons that we are fighting his nomination so hard.
is there hope of that?
No.
Yes. No, there is. I mean,
okay, let's hear this.
Abandon all hope right now.
No. I mean, right now. So,
by the way, Armin is a little bit more pessimistic. I am a little bit optimistic. This is our.
I'm
this is your shtick. I mean, I think one of the major things right now is that this judge is polling at numbers that are so terrible. They're down with the only other two Supreme Court nominees who have failed in the modern era, Judge Bork and Harriet Miers. So both of those judges polled in all the polls that we've seen at or better than Kavanaugh. So he's really unpopular. That's number one, and that's no small thing, because I don't know why people don't think that's a big deal, but politicians actually do care about popular opinion. That's how they keep their jobs. Should be a truism. So that's number one. Number two is there's a possibility that this gets pushed out past the midterm elections, in which case, and depending on how those come out, that could completely change things.
A way to do that is to challenge Trump's legitimacy, right? After the all of the stuff that's coming out with the Mueller investigation. Would that?
I mean, first of all, I think the idea that a president who is under the type of investigation that we're seeing right now is nominating people to lifetime appointments is absurd. I mean, and if the Senate was actually acting as a check and balance on him the way it's supposed to work in our flawed system, he would not be nominating anybody right now. All of that would be on pause. But we have a Senate who's run by the Republicans, and their main goal right now is to stack the courts as much as they can.
It's working. I mean, a lot of people were like, "Oh, Christians in the United States, they're so stupid. They're voting for Trump, even though Trump is like the least Christian person."
They were smart. They were ahead of the curve.
No, they were like, "We don't give a shit about how Christian Trump is. He's going to give us conservative judges." And it paid off. Like they were looking into they were investing in the long-term payment for this, and they basically put aside their feelings regarding how Christian Trump is, because of they were looking at the bigger picture. So it paid off, right?
Yeah, and I think just to note that it's like, forget about the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh is one guy, but just across the board, he's changing the face of the judiciary across the U.S. in terms of the judges that he has already appointed that are already there. So
that's true. That said, we actually have stopped some of his other nominees as well. FFRF works.
Wow.
Yes.
You guys.
Yes.
I don't know if people in the U.S. recognize how you're actually changing people. I don't know if people recognize their lives being changed by people like you, right? I don't know if they understand that, but that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, but it is massive. That's a huge it's just a fact that people think, oh, okay, we got the First Amendment, so nobody can challenge that. But it needs constant protecting every time someone tries to violate it. If you don't stand up against it, people will just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, right? And that's where you guys come in.
So for people that might not understand, how does this impact people's people's daily lives? How does this impact when it comes to women, when it comes to gay rights, when it comes to different things, because people might feel like, oh, this is just politics and stuff, but no, this affects people's lives.
Absolutely. I mean, everything is in jeopardy right now. So first of all, Ali, what you were saying is so perfect. We are watchers on that wall of separation. That's what we do for a living. And I have a job.
Okay.
You goddamn right. I have a job because we get 5,000 complaints a year. 5,000 complaints a year. And that's just what people come to us and tell us about that are happening. And half of those violations are happening in our public school system. Jeez. Where we have teachers and coaches telling kids that they have to pray before they take the field or before they go down to lunch, where they're teaching creationism and, Bible in class.
How many people do you have on your staff?
So we have 9 attorneys. Right now, the summers are the best because we get legal interns in the summer, and we have 6 legal interns. We have 2 legal assistants also. So our legal team is pretty sizable. At any given point, it's between about 11 or 12 and 20 people.
But 11 or 12, and you have to deal with 5,000 complaints a year. Holy crap! Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's basically 9 people that are standing between religion and the rest of the people.
There's a lot of that, like those cartoons where there's people putting their fingers in the dam. You know, it feels a lot like that from time to time. But I mean, we are successful, and one of the things you can do is, you can take a good court case, which we've been doing, 16-1 now lately, and those when you win those cases, it really helps you defend other parts of the wall. That's one of the things
because of precedent and stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And this case that we took that you mentioned in the intro, that case is going to cost the school district probably about $400,000 that they're going to have to pay over to our side because they took a losing case, and that's a number that we can turn around and cite to other school districts that are violating the law and say, hey, if you don't want to be out $400,000, you might want to consider listening to us so we don't have to sue you,
right?
Which is effective.
Yeah.
But I mean,
go ahead.
I was just going to say the one of the ways it really it affects people is just in their daily lives. If you are a parent and your kid is in public school, like that, there's a good chance that either they're not getting proselytized and read the Bible because of work that groups like FFRF have done, or if that happens, you can report it to us right there on our website, and we will step in for you and get that fixed. And if we have to go to court, it won't cost that person a dime, and we'll take that case to court for them. So it really is a public service that we provide, and the separation of state and church really affects so many different issues that I think people don't realize.
Can you give us some examples?
Yes. I mean, the primary driver of violating LGBT rights is conservative religion. You mentioned the Masterpiece Cakeshop case. First of all, that case is all about religion and using religion to exempt yourself from civil rights laws, which let's talk about that. Can you explain the Masterpiece Cakeshop case, just a summary for an audience that doesn't know the technicalities of it too much? Yeah, sure. So in the United States, we have civil rights laws, and those laws arose out of the racial segregation and intimidation and discrimination that minorities had faced in the United States in the past. And those laws basically say that if you run a business that's a place of public accommodation, so if it's a restaurant, if it's a movie theater, if it's a place where people can go and shop, you cannot discriminate against customers on the basis of certain things. And that includes race, it includes religion, and then various jurisdictions, so different states, add in other protections as they want. So in Colorado, you can't discriminate against people because of their sexual orientation. So you can't discriminate against a gay couple and say, I'm not going to serve you, and then turn around and serve a straight couple. That's against the law. But
that's not everywhere, though.
Not everywhere. And so the federal law protects race, religion, and national origin. And then different state laws have different protections. And then even different cities and other jurisdictions. So for instance, right here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I am, where FFRF is based, we actually got non-religion, atheism specifically as a protected class.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Can you hear my applause? Okay.
Yeah. But so this what's the story? Do you want to summarize the story in the
so I mean, so that's the legal landscape. And so you had a gay couple go into this bakery.
When was this?
This was quite a few years ago now, and they said, we would like you to bake us a cake for our wedding. And before there was even a chance to discuss what the cake would look like, would it be white, would it say we're gay, what would be on it, the owner of the bakery said, nope, I don't serve gay weddings. I don't serve gay couples, so I'm not going to make you a cake. So that's a pretty clear violation of the law and the civil rights.
They were in a state. They were in a state that this was protected. Like
yes, correct. In the state of Colorado, sexual orientation's protected.
Right.
And so the state civil rights division said you broke the law.
Right.
And the baker said, you know what? I have a free speech right to not make this cake, and I have a religious right to not make this cake for these people. So those were the two questions that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court punted. And it didn't decide either of those questions.
Well, it sided with the baker, but they said that this is not going to set a precedent. This is just for this one case.
Exactly. It was a very weird decision. Essentially, what the court did was said that the civil rights body, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, they said some mean things about the baker's religion.
Oh.
And because, first of all, they didn't, but we'll just put that aside.
Their excuse was not like that this is free speech or this is freedom of religion. They just questioned the lower court's method of coming to the conclusion. Because they said like they were very anti-religious, so their decision does not stand.
Precisely. That's actually a perfect summation. And it's wrong. The Supreme Court, if you look at the record, they manufactured this hostility. It absolutely did not exist. But the crazy thing about the case is that this idea that you have a religious right to discriminate or to be exempted from those civil rights laws, that's been struck down by the Supreme Court many, many times. That's
why they couldn't make this argument. They knew they couldn't make this argument, right?
No, the Supreme Court should have just struck it down again right away. There was, there was a case, Piggy Park, which was about discriminating against a black woman, saying, God told me I can't let her into my barbecue joint. The Supreme Court literally laughed that that argument out of court. In another case, Bob Jones University. Bob Jones was this televangelist, this mega preacher. They were discriminating in their on-campus housing at their university on the basis of race. And they said, well, we're allowed to do that because our religion says we have to do that.
Well, this was until very recently, right?
This was the 1980s.
Right.
Yeah.
And the government said, well, then you don't get tax-exempt status. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't use your religion to discriminate. That's not a thing. But
a lot of Christians celebrated this whole Baker.
Yes.
But the thing is that they shouldn't have celebrated because this wasn't a win for them. This was just a decision on this one case and one case alone. It didn't open the door for them to be able to not serve.
But it is encouraging, though. I mean, it is encouraging if the Supreme Court is saying that.
No, because they didn't set a precedent. Like, it didn't give them a win. It would just give them one case and one case alone, nothing else, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's fair. The best way I've heard it described is essentially they gave the baker a get out of jail free card.
Right,
for this.
Right.
And I think that's accurate.
So as a libertarian argument, so a lot of people might be like, listen, what the fuck is the government telling me like not to bake cakes for who I'm supposed to bake cakes for. Somebody might come into my store and just be like, I don't like your face. Get that? Like, that's why I don't want to like.
Yeah, but guess what? Right. That's okay. You can do that.
That's legal. Yeah. You can do that. Like, if I want to say, okay, you know what? You're a Trump supporter. I don't want to bake you a cake. I can do that legally.
Yeah. So what is this? But this makes religion seem, okay. So if you can do that, that makes this religion, it seems like we're acting like religion is more special, and it's not, right? So why can't I say like, hey, you're a fucking Nazi, I'm not going to make you a swastika nuts cake or something? You can. So if I can do that, then why can't somebody say like, I'm not going to make a Christian cake? I can't do that one. Can I do that one?
So you can't discriminate against somebody if they are a member of the protected class as defined in the civil rights laws.
As an atheist, if somebody comes and says, I want to make a Quran cake, I can't be like, no, I don't want to make a Quran cake. I'm an atheist. I can't say that.
So there's another question there. So the question is, would you make a Quran cake or a cake like that for anybody or not? Right? So it's not just a question of what the person's class is, but it's also, would you be discriminating if you did it? So there was a guy in Colorado who tried to do kind of what you're saying. He went around to a bunch of different bakeries and said, I want you to bake a cake that says, whatever that quote is from Leviticus about gays being
gay people.
Yeah, the abomination quote. Okay. I want you to make a cake that says that. And the bakeries said, yeah, we wouldn't make a cake like that for anybody, so we don't have to make it for you.
But then the baker could be like, I wouldn't make any gay wedding cake.
But it's not. But what is a gay wedding cake?
Yeah, so I think Armin.
No.
But am I getting this right? So what you're saying is that if it's about a cake, if it's actually about the cake, then that's a different thing. Like, I wouldn't bake this cake for everybody. But if it's about the person that you're not baking it for, and if it's
what if they come to me for a cake and I'm an atheist, and there is a for a Ramadan feast, like at the end of to break the fast, right? So the cake is just a normal cake, but it's for a religious celebration. I'm like, I don't endorse religious celebrations. I don't want to bake your cake.
So in this scenario, you own a bakery. They just want a cake that's just like, say, like a white cake that they're going to use for whatever purpose. And you're saying, no, because that's a religious purpose, I'm not going to serve you.
Yeah.
You'd be breaking the law.
Oh, shit. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you'd be breaking the law in that case. Yeah.
Do you think that's too much government in your life?
No.
No?
I don't think so. Because you have to look back at where these laws originated, right? I mean, the discrimination that African Americans faced in this country was intense, and I would really recommend anybody who hasn't read Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail to go back and read that. He talks about how the clouds of mental inferiority that formed in his daughter's eyes, and he could see this happening when she was not allowed to go into Funtown and having to sleep in the corner of his car because entire swaths of the country he couldn't get a hotel room because he was black. And so, let's just say for a moment the Supreme Court had said, yes, you can not serve people who are gay because of their religion. Right. Or because of your religion, excuse me. What then is to stop that person from saying, well, I can't serve people who are black because of my religion?
Well, I think,
and take it another step farther and say, what's to stop other people if that's allowed, from boycotting bakeries, or worse, to bakeries that do serve LGBTQ people and black people? Because that's what was happening all over the South. The KKK was rallying around and burning down restaurants that serve black people.
When your society is so immature that government needs to step in, I think like maybe the government should step in. But at some point, then when the society is mature enough, maybe social consequences are enough, and you don't need legal consequences. You know
but Armin, at what level? So, for instance,
I don't know what that level is, but I'm just saying that at some point the government can be like the morality police, right?
So what I was going to give is, I want to give an example just of different cities, for instance. So I know, Dave Rubin has said this. He's like, if someone is discriminating against a gay couple baking a cake, then, people should boycott that shop, and other shops will go ahead and bake them cakes, and everything will be fine. Eventually it'll correct itself. No. Yeah. But the problem is, right now, you do have towns in the US. You have rural towns where it won't just be one bakery. Everybody will get together and say, we're going to discriminate. And you're going to end up like a situation where Martin Luther King couldn't get a hotel room because there are swaths of the majority opinion is against it.
Right.
So when it comes to that's where you actually need
I'm just saying that I don't know where that line of maturity is, but I'm just saying once the society is mature enough, then at that point that should be switched from legal consequences to social consequences.
That's also temporary. Society can always go back, right?
Well,
society can always go back.
So what are we going to do? Are we going to make cheating on your wife illegal? There needs to be a line between.
I would say that's a flawed analogy. So first of all, Ali, you're 100% right, and there are towns that did that. There are towns that specifically said they wouldn't serve gay couples. And I wrote a whole piece about this too. It's called "Everything You Need to Win an Argument About the Gay Wedding Cake Case." And there's a video in there that CNN went to this town in Georgia, and they all the I think it was the florists said, yeah, no, we would never do a gay wedding. So I mean, it's not just a hypothetical; it's a reality here. Now, your point about
but CNN is fake news. That's okay. Anyway, go ahead. Okay. Yeah,
but your point about when a society matures enough, I think I see where you're going with that. When racism is dead, and when people accept LGBT, and there's no need for those laws anymore. I mean, they just won't be enforced, right?
Not that when there's zero of it. When there's low enough where the society will use shaming and to enforce,
society can correct it.
Correct it as well. Yeah, I just think there's a point where the government can step out. I'm not saying if the point is now, but I'm just saying. But even if somebody argues that the government shouldn't be involved in these things, while the law is there, I think it's unfair that religious people get away with not following the law and the other people have to. So even if you think the government shouldn't have these laws, while laws are there, they should be enforced on everybody equally, right? We could agree, we could at least agree with that, right?
Absolutely. And I think, and that was one of the things that I think was really missing in the debate about the gay wedding cake. And I actually had a debate with Ruben about this very issue.
Oh.
And, you know, if you want to debate the laws, that's fine. But those laws are valid. They've been upheld by the court and they're in place in the United States right now. So there's no argument to be had about whether or not this bakery violated the law. They absolutely violated the law. The question is, does their religion give them an exemption from that law? And
from violating it.
Yeah, and we would all say absolutely not.
So okay. when you guys, you know, you're mostly successful, but when you're not successful,
mm-hmm.
The Satanic Temple steps in, doesn't it? Sometimes, right? I think
they're like our panic button a little bit.
Okay, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. Explain.
So, for example, let's say like a school wants to bring Bible to school and teach Bible as religion. By the way, I think we're all here okay with religion being taught in as a history or as culture. We just don't want to be taught as science or as fact, right? Like that's what.
Or as anything compulsory to take as a compulsory class. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, if part of your history you follow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think the way we talk about that is you can teach about religion, but you can't preach religion.
Nice. Good. That's a good.
You can educate, but you can't indoctrinate. Those are the two ways.
Okay.
I like that. Teach, don't preach. Educate, don't indoctrinate. Like, you know, we need more of this because, like, otherwise we're gonna lose to the Sarah Palins, like drill baby drill, or build that wall. We need nice poetic
when you're trying to,
like that.
Okay, so when you're trying to keep the Bible out of a science class and for some reason you fail. And that's when the Satanic Temple comes in. And they're like, oh, religion is allowed in school, right? So here's the Satanic Bible. Here's like satanic coloring books for children. And they come into the school and all of a sudden the Christian parents start panicking. And like, what the fuck is this devilish stuff in our school? And like, well, you open the door to the religion and this is a religion. This is an official religion.
You don't even need the Satanic Temple. All you need is Muslims.
No.
Come on.
I like the Satanic Temple way more. First of all, because I don't want Islam in school, right? I don't want Islam in any school, even though it makes the Christians panic. The Satanic Temple is like a fake atheist. Is run by atheists. They're atheists. This whole thing is just a joke.
They're a religion. They will tell you they are a religion. No, yeah, they're serious.
They will say they're officially. Okay, they're officially a religion, but they don't believe in fucking Lucifer. They have gone out of their way to say that they are atheists.
In the metaphorical sense, they believe in him. But your example is actually that's real life. So that's from an FFRF case that I worked on in Florida.
Oh, tell us.
Oh yeah. So this was a school district, the Orange County Public Schools, that were allowing outside groups to come in and distribute Bibles to the students.
Right.
That's illegal. We said you can't do that. And they said, well, actually, it's fine because we let anybody who wants to distribute literature come into their schools and do it. And we said, that's still not allowed. We went back and forth. Rather than suing them over that, we said, okay, fine. We would like to distribute our own literature. And we came up with this long list of stuff, much shorter than the Bible still, but included Sam Harris's Letter to a Christian Nation. It included some pamphlets that we'd written, and they censored almost all of it.
What?
They said no. And this was one of my favorites. So one of the books was by a guy named Dr. Robert Price. I don't know if you know him. He says that Jesus didn't exist. And the school board wrote back to us and they said, the claim that Jesus Christ did not die and did not raise from the dead is age inappropriate for kids.
What?
Right? So they banned
the Bible is age inappropriate.
Yeah, no kidding. That's what I mean. So the claim that some guy was tortured, died, and then rose like a zombie, that's fine for kids. Saying that didn't happen, right. That's age inappropriate.
No, you have two daughters raping their own father in the Bible. Like, how is that age inappropriate?
After that's my favorite
gave
part.
Them up for gang
that
rape.
Verse is so hot.
Right?
I'm kidding.
After.
Genesis 19, everybody look it up.
Yeah, it was without consent. They made him drunk. Also, I think their father. Yeah, you're right. Their father was giving them up to a mob to rape because because the father didn't want them to rape the guests instead. So like, hey, have my daughters instead. That's, yeah. Actually,
that's in the Quran too, by the way.
The Bible has to have an R rating. Legally.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So, guys, in the interest of time, because this is amazing. Okay. So, and I know we could go on about this for hours.
I just want to say, you guys and the Satanic Temple should just like partner up, like come up with a deal.
Well, we did. So I'll finish real fast. So
go ahead.
So we sued over that, and the school district said, "Okay, you can distribute all your stuff. We're sorry," and we did. And then we said, hey, the Satanic Temple, if you guys want to distribute your stuff, this school district's letting you. We sued them for censoring us, so they can't censor you. So they submitted their coloring books, these cute little coloring books that teach these great lessons to the school board. And the whole community just freaked out, lost it, and they closed down the forum and said, nobody can distribute anything anymore. That's it.
That's how you do it.
Which is what we asked them to do in the first place.
Yes,
nice. No, that's amazing. So there's a couple of things I'm just going to structure because I know that that's,
and we have Patron. We have some Patron questions too.
Right. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. First of all, I want to just talk about the number of atheists in the U.S. and how they have to be in government. And the second thing is we want to get to that Islamic jihadism aspect of Islam and how America views Islam and Muslims. And finally, I want to get to patron questions. So to start the first topic, I want to quote Richard Dawkins. You mentioned the God delusion, right? So in 2002, Richard Dawkins had a TED talk called "The Case for Militant Atheism," and there was a part in that talk where he cited a meta-analysis by Paul Bell, which was about IQ levels and education levels, and study after study has shown that people who are non-religious tend to have higher IQs, mean IQs, than people who are religious. So he was talking about it, and then he said that and even in the National Academy of Sciences, only 7% actually believed in a personal God. So there's a huge proportion, a huge portion of the American public, right? And usually some of the smartest people who don't believe in God, who are atheists. So he said this, and I quote, so we've reached a truly remarkable situation, a grotesque mismatch between the American intelligentsia and the American electorate. If I'm right, this means that high office in this country, in the greatest country in the world, is barred to the very people best qualified to hold it, the intelligentsia, unless they're prepared to lie about their beliefs. So he's saying, he basically assumes that there are loads of atheists who are running for office, but they just can't say it because they won't get elected. So he concludes it by saying, to put it bluntly, American political opportunities are heavily loaded against those who are simultaneously intelligent and honest. So here's the thing. Can you come out as an atheist and run for office? I know that there's, I think, a handful of congressmen who are openly agnostic, but can you be an atheist and run for president? Can you be an atheist and run for the Senate? And if not, what do we do about that? How do we actually get some traction just in terms of lobbying? I mean, it's a quarter of the country, and especially a third of millennials don't identify with any religion in the United States. So how do we get that kind of representation in the government?
I mean, that's a question that we've been talking about for at least more than a decade. I mean, you said that was 2002. And Dawkins is absolutely right in that instance. It's been a problem for a long time. Now, there are a couple, as you mentioned, open agnostics in Congress. Representative Jared Huffman just pretty much came out and said, yeah, I don't believe. And he started something called the Free Thought Caucus in Congress, which is members who are free thinking. This has been a huge deal. That just was the end of April. So that's very new. There are now 7 members, grown from 3. So that's a big deal.
That's a great start. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't know that either.
I didn't know they even care. Like, the fact it's one thing for them to be non-religious. The fact that they think that they should have like a free thought group.
Yes.
That shows that they see how important this is.
Yeah. Like they'll say it when they leave office, like Barney Frank, he came out afterwards after serving in Congress.
But it seems like they're saying it while they're in office now.
Yeah.
So it's not a requirement that you be non-religious to join it, but they are fighting for an absolute separation of state and church, for reason and science-based legislation, to keep the secular character of our government, all these really valuable goals, and to lower the stigma of having non-religious people in the public eye. And I mean, one of the things that I always say when I end any talk I give, I travel around giving talks for FFRF, is I say that we're going to win this fight with demographics. And I think that is the case. And it's why I encourage people, if you are able to come out of the closet as a non-believer, an atheist, an agnostic, whatever you call yourself, it is one of the most important things that you can do to support state-church separation and the work that the Freedom from Religion Foundation does. And, you mentioned that, almost a third of millennials are non-religious, but there's even more exciting numbers coming out. In January of 2018, Barna, which is this Christian outfit that does polling here in the United States, they found that 21% of kids born after 1999 are atheist or agnostic, not non-religious, but atheist or agnostic.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a huge jump. So I think the more people come out of the closet and the more that it becomes socially acceptable to be a non-religious American, the more it's going to trickle into politics. I mean, politics is popular opinion. So it's going to be the last place that we see.
So it's important to, because Armin brings this up, and he brings this up quite a bit in the podcast, and I completely agree with him. He says, when people say that atheists should not organize, or because then they become like a religion, we should organize, right? I mean, we should be getting together, and we should be forming organizations. We should be saying that we are atheists.
If when people
openly
say that, you have to tell them, okay, don't also start a book club, because that is going to turn into a religion. Don't go hang out with your friends, because now you're community and that's a religion. Don't do anything, because it's going to be. Don't sing, because that's now like going to church and singing. It's such a bullshit argument that whenever we get it's really like religion has monopoly over or getting together and organizing shit.
Yeah, I know. So that's actually, so that's really important. I guess we should stress that a lot, that, people are listening to this, and this goes out to anybody who's listening in other countries as well, not just the US.
Yeah.
If you can come out of the closet in any way you can, even if you don't say atheist, if you start free thought groups, if you start little, science rationality groups, whatever you do, organize, get together. Don't get dissuaded by people who tell you that, it's another religion. Who cares? Just get together and start speaking out, because that's how you make change.
Actually, I want to stress on that, because a lot of people look at the US and they think like their own very religious country is so far behind, and they get disappointed. They think like it's never going to be even close. Like, I know people in the United States, they're upset about religion in their lives, but a lot of people in like other countries are like, wow, we're not even there yet, right? To be even
sure.
But the thing is that you have to look at history. Like, you just, even a small amount of activism, your own global, your own communities, your own local get-togethers, just announcing openly if it's safe on social media that you're not religious or you're atheist. These will add up. These are, you have to take the first steps, or I don't know. It seems
you're 100% right. And it's more effective than any argument that you can muster. There was a study done here in the States about the shifting attitudes towards gay marriage, and they looked at people who had changed their minds from being against gay marriage to being for gay marriage. And they broke that group in and asked them, what was it that changed your mind? And the biggest group by far, more than a third of the people changed their minds just because they knew somebody who was gay. That's it. Now, it's much easier to hide being an atheist or an agnostic than it is to being gay, but it's time to stop hiding. If you can, you got to come out and say, I'm an atheist and I don't give a damn if you think less of me for it. And that's the best thing that you can do to forward this movement.
Right.
Yeah. We just, and we actually just had this. We had Matt Dillahunty on the last episode, and we actually talked exactly. Yeah, I know he's amazing. We both, I told him that. I was like, I love you. I started that way. And I don't know how he took that. But
this is the main reason why behind Atheist Republic, the fact I started Atheist Republic, and the bonus, the side thing that happens is that a lot of people find us and maybe they start doubting their religion. But the main reason is to just gather all atheists together, for atheists, first of all, to see how many of them are there out there, how many of them are there in their own city, but also for religious people to see that, oh my God, my brother just liked this page, or my classmate, or my teacher, or my daughter is liking this page or commenting, to see there are so many atheists, and you know a lot of them. A lot of my friends that are not even activists, when they come and check my page, are like, oh, I didn't know like 5 of my friends are a fan of your page. Wow, that's so just to show how common it is for people to, not even if they're not atheists, to actually consider these views, right? To normalize it.
Can I play cheerleader again for, and in this case for Armin? Like, I think that because we're so used to talking about it, people don't realize Atheist Republic is the largest online platform for atheists in the world. Armin started this, an Iranian ex-Muslim started this. He's got 1.9 million members. Wow. And a lot of ex-Muslims who actually come out and they become atheists, and they actually speak about it, and they even organize in countries like Malaysia and in other Muslim majority countries. Like, they actually come to it through Atheist Republic. So it is actually phenomenal. 1.9 million people. That
is unbelievable. And it goes back to what you're saying about organization. It is critical. FFRF started with 3 people around a kitchen table, a mother, her daughter, and one other guy. And now we're the largest, free thought association in America, and we're litigating these cases all the time and winning them. And that happened because people started getting organized. And I think maybe if this turns you off, think of it as, instead of organizing, think of it as, joining your voices together to shout down religion. They do it every day. They get together in church every Sunday and shout down their doubts. We can get together and shout them down.
Have you ever done anything against any Muslim groups?
We have. We've never taken a court case, but this is a common refrain that we get from our Christian critics. They say, "Oh yeah, well you never go after Muslims, do you?" It's so common that I wrote a FAQ on our frequently asked questions page on Freedom from Religion Foundation about this. But we absolutely do. One example that jumps to mind is we had a professor at, I think it was I think it was a Virginia community college, who was supposed to,
the guy who had the sign up on his door.
No, he was supposed to be teaching a class about Islam so people could learn about it. Perfectly fine. You're able to do that. You can teach but not preach. You can educate, not indoctrinate. He was doing the latter on both of those. And we wrote a letter. We got that stopped. And there have been a number of those cases. It's just rarer because Muslims are already less than 1% of the population here, and to get to be, the First Amendment stops the government from doing something.
Right. So, what about any other groups? Jewish groups, Hindu groups?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I tackled a Hindu shrine that was put up on public property in California. I got that taken down. We've done a lot of work with, some of the really cloistered and Orthodox Jewish communities. They have a lot of problems there, and we've done a lot of work with that. Wow. They like to string up wire around neighborhoods. These things called Eruvs, which is it's kind of amazing. Essentially, what it does is it extends. You know how they're not allowed to work on the Sabbath,
right?
But you're allowed to do certain things in the courtyard in your house. And this magically extends the boundaries of their house anywhere within the wire, so they can.
Oh my God! They'll do anything.
It's amazing. So they have these rules.
This reminds me like the ground is lava kind of pretend game.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's exactly like that. So they have these rules that their God imposes on them, and they want to follow them, but then they also want to get out of them. So they hang these wires all over everybody elce's property and stuff. And we've done a lot of work. I saw
this. There was a documentary where there was a way, because they can't make phone calls, so they had a way of because they didn't want to press the buttons directly, they had something they could do where they could pull a string or something and it would hit the right button, so they could make phone calls. And it's so weird. It's like the way they write God with hyphen for the O. And
okay, Tripoli, and then Patron question.
So this is great because you asked about Muslims and Islam. So this is good. So one of the things that I guess people don't know, and okay, so I'm going to start this. I'm going to make this a little bit fun. So I'm going to read out a quote, okay, for the audience, people who are listening. And the quote is this, all right? And you just have to guess where it's from. The quote is this: The ambassador answered us that their right was founded on the laws of the Prophet, that it was written in their Quran, that all nations who should not have answered their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. Right, so I put this quote in my book too, and I asked people where it's from. Some of the smart ones know, but there are, okay, I shouldn't say smart, but some of the people who are knowledgeable about it know. But most people actually don't know. They don't understand because it sounds like a very recent quote. It's about jihad, martyrdom. But those are the words of Thomas Jefferson from 1786. Right? And the history of this is that the northern African states, which included Tripoli, which is modern day Libya, Morocco, Algeria, all of these states, they had pirates. These were Islamic pirates who were looting ships that were coming from the United States at the time, and they were coming into the Mediterranean. And these ships initially had protection by the British. But when the U.S. declared its independence, the British said, "Okay, screw you. We're not going to give you protection anymore. Fend for yourselves." So Thomas Jefferson decided to go to London at the time to meet a guy named Sidi Haji Abdurrahman Aja, who was Tripoli's envoy to London. And this is in 1786. And he said, can you stop looting our ships? What do we have to do? And that's what the guy told him. So this is before the U.S. had its first president. It's before
the Constitution was written.
Right.
Before the Constitution. It was before
the first time religion came into foreign policy issue, right? Like, is it?
Yeah. Well, not only that. So this is before Al Qaeda. This is before the Taliban. Before Israel. Before Zionism. Right. Before any kind of thing. This was before the U.S. even had a foreign policy. So when people say that all of the stuff that's happening, Islamic extremism and everything, has to do with foreign policy, well, here is an ambassador from 1786, before U.S. policy, talking about jihad and taking infidel slaves because that is their ticket to paradise in the Quran. This is a guy saying that before you even had the existence of the U.S. foreign policy or even the existence of the United States, for that matter, officially. So this is something that is, and so what came out of this was a Treaty of Tripoli. So what they did was the U.S. actually created a treaty with Tripoli where they said, okay, we are not officially a Christian nation, and we don't have anything against Muslims.
So United States kind of owes Tripoli for not being a Christian nation, like having it in writing that they're not a Christian country.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the more explicit statements that we have from the founding era. And I mean, the document's from 1797, but it was negotiated under President Washington, George Washington, our first president. He oversaw the Constitutional Convention. John Adams signed it, our second president, and it was with the unanimous consent of the U.S. Senate. Wow. So that's about
that said that the U.S. that America is no way a Christian nation.
Yeah, not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That's what it says. The United States is not in any sense.
How many of them were there? Unanimous?
Senators at that time, there would have been 28.
Wow, I didn't expect you to actually know that. You know a lot of stuff. That's great.
That's why we have Andrew on it. That's why we're so excited.
I shouldn't have asked that. That's a very technical question to embarrass somebody if they don't know the exact number. Sorry, but
it's 2 times the number of states that there were at that time.
Okay.
So it's not. Yeah.
But, all right. Yeah. Patron questions.
So, yeah, I mean, that was one. Actually, before the Patron questions, I just want to ask you one thing, just your perspective. Because going on the Islam and Muslim thing, because I mean, that is a focus of our podcast. So right now, we talked about Trump and how he's having an effect on the U.S. when it comes to appointing Christian and conservative judges and all of that, and how, your fight has intensified as a result of that. So now we're in the situation where, you have you have recent policies like the travel ban, and you've had, some of the things that are thought to be anti-Muslim that Trump is doing, or that people associated with Trump are doing. And you also have this Freedom from Religion Foundation, where you want to also speak, you also oppose Islamic theology, like all of the stuff in Islam. And it's not that much different from Christianity. So how do you balance your criticism of Islam with the there's some of the policies that Trump is doing that are sort of anti-Muslim, or anti-Muslim.
Yeah, I mean, we do, and I think probably a great instance is in those travel ban cases that went to the Supreme Court, the Freedom from Religion Foundation actually wrote briefs attacking those bans. And the reason is because they were bans that seem to be based on religion. And if you can ban people and define their rights as citizens based on their religion, then you can do it based on their non-religion too. I mean, if you look at every public opinion poll in this country for the past 20 years, the people who are always at the bottom of the barrel are Muslims and atheists. We are the most disliked and the most distrusted people. It's usually atheists. Actually, we've been kind of
we've been below. Paying off. The only group that has been kind of like the same as us is rapists, I think, based on the UBC study. So I think it's changing a little bit. Muslims are going a little bit under eight.
They are.
I should have called my book "The Atheist Muslim Rapist." That way I would have gotten all three most despised groups.
Right. So, but the UBC study, which is actually a university where I am. The study that they did showed that the least trusted group in North America, both Canada and United States, the two bottom ones, which were the same, were atheists and rapists.
We've actually cited that in court cases several times. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. That's interesting.
It's a terrible outcome, but it's a good study.
Yeah. But now we're beating both the rapists and Muslims. I guess Muslims are going to go join the rapists.
This is a very odd conversation. We're going to get taken out of context here, and
someone's going to take a clip and put it.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think the overall idea when people think that Islam is a real problem, the real thing to worry about here, and I do think it is. It is a much bigger problem worldwide. I mean, Armin and I come from parts of the world where the kind of stuff that we have in the U.S. is obviously a huge dream for many free thinkers in the Muslim world. So it clearly is. I mean, we don't want to deny that that proportionality aspect.
But that's why you need to keep it, because it gives the rest of the world a model to aspire to, right?
Yeah. But for those of us who do live here, and for me, I came from that part of the world. I lived here because I actually really believed in the values here. I believe in the separation of church and state. I believe in secularism. I believe in free expression and free speech. So the reason I feel that it's important to also talk about Christianity and the influence it has here in this part of the world is because this part of the world is what I identify with. And I don't want to see this go down that slippery slope. I don't want to even, as people say, nativity scene, who cares? This is nativity, let them do it. But, the problem is it is a slippery slope. Once you let one thing go, I mean, Dave Silverman said this here. He's like, okay, you've got one Star of David there. And sure, it's not harming anybody, but what if they want two? What if they want three? And then after
you're
that,
opening the gate. I mean, slippery slope is a fallacy, but just because there's also a fallacy. Just because it's something as a logic fallacy doesn't mean sometimes it's not true. Like if you allow religion in public, in public life, in public spaces, that's the only gate. It's not going to be a little bit. Once that gate is open, it's going to open all the way.
Well, and this actually shows up. You don't have to use hypotheticals. I gave a whole talk on this that's on YouTube called "Why We Have to Sweat the Small Stuff," and it's because courts actually use
that down.
Yeah, please do. But courts use little violations to justify bigger violations. So they use things like, well, in God we trust is on our money. And the kids in school say, under God in the pledge, to justify things like governments praying before a city council meeting. So these little tiny violations are used to justify bigger violations. And then what happens next? They're used to justify even bigger violations. And eventually you get to a place where you have somebody wanting to discriminate against a minority couple because of their religion.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that is exactly what they say. Like a lot of times when you say, well, the founding fathers, and then people will come back and say, well, it says in God we trust on the money. The Pledge of Allegiance says under God. So why can't, if we can have that, why can't we have this? And that's exactly how it works. That's where the toxicity is.
Patron questions.
All right. Okay. Let's move on to Patron questions. All right. Patrons. Thank you, everybody. By the way, I got to say, I was Hold on. I was in New York City and I met a patron and he said, I support the podcast. And then I realized, I was like, wow, when you actually pay money to listen to something that is free, that means that you really care about it. So I just want to say,
in London too, I was interviewing people for the debate between Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, and Douglas Murray. I was live interviewing people, and one of the people that came asked a question. And if you're listening to this, if you're a patron and you're listening to this, he came and in the line he said, "By the way, I'm a patron of your podcast, Secular Justice." I was like, I wish I could thank him more, but I had to go to the next question.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really. So
I just gotta say, I know it takes a lot, and I know that you guys don't have to do this. I know you could hear it. So the fact that you care this much, I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day. And you know, I'm a patron of certain things that I like too, and it's I can't express how
well, you could
how much we appreciate it.
You could express it by asking your questions.
Oh my God, Armin, this is for the patrons. I am getting to the patron questions. Right. Oh, actually, we're out of time. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. All right, so starting with Michael. Michael, he said, okay, first he says, forgive me for my future messages. Don't say that. It's all good. Okay, then he says, how far does the wall between church and state go? There seems to be a lot of leeway for religious groups to heavily influence life in questionable fashions. I think Curious Joel would be an example. I think this is actually a really good point. I know we covered some of this already, Andrew, but Curious Joel, actually, a friend of mine, Freemet Goldberger, wrote an article about how, I mean, she grew up in this community and she was a Hasidic, super conservative Jew. All the police force, everything was part of this community. She wasn't allowed to drive. She said that it was like Saudi Arabia. She wasn't allowed to drive in this town in New York City because the law enforcement, everything was like that. So, how far does that wall go? How do people get away with that?
Well, I think one thing too is just because something exists and is happening doesn't mean that it's permissible under the Constitution. There are violations happening that we haven't been able to stop yet. And I think the best way for people to conceptualize how the separation of state and church is supposed to work is people should not be abusing a government office, which belongs to everyone, to we the people, to be promoting their personal religion, right? And that encompasses most of what is happening. So in Curious Joel, you have this police force, which is supposed to be a government public body enforcing religious law, very clearly out of bounds, should not be happening. You have a public school teacher teaching about their personal religion, very clearly out of bounds, should not be happening. And it's using the machinery of the state to promote the fallacies of religion. That is what is prohibited under the separation of state and church. If you want to kind of try to sum it up in one sentence, it's not easy to do. And the founders themselves even recognize that there's going to be this gray area and there's going to be tough cases, but and there's going to be cases where we haven't solved the problem yet. And I think that area, I mean, all these ultra Orthodox communities, there's a lot of problems. I mean, even small things like having swimming pools segregated by sex on certain days and things like that. There are a lot of problems. Stringing up the A-roofs all around so that everybody has to follow. These things exist, but that doesn't mean that they are permissible and constitutional. It's just they haven't been stopped yet.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make a correction. That was actually from Mars. Okay. And Mars and Michael were having this conversation about how different it is in the U.S. Versus in the UK. Michael said that here nobody gives a shit about religion. Actually, anyone raising any religion subject is treated as a weirdo. And this is kind of interesting because even in Canada, politicians running for office actually try to avoid saying anything about their religious beliefs, whereas some conservatives have started recently, but in the US it's almost necessary. I mean, they actually have. They had that. Who's that guy that I remember both Obama and McCain had to do an interview with? Was it Warren?
Rick Warren.
Sorry, what?
Are you thinking of Rick Warren?
Rick Warren, yeah, the preacher. So they actually sat and they did complete interviews with him, and he asked them straight up questions about their views on religious things. It was almost like a public litmus test of whether this person is a legitimate candidate or not.
Yeah, it's a voter imposed auto da fe. It's this test of faith. That the voters require, but the Constitution prohibits. So it's frustrating for us to see. But
yeah, Mars is also saying he's definitely going to buy your book.
Oh, great.
And so will I. So please.
Yeah, we should know the name so we could give a shout out. Where would people find it when it comes out?
Well, so right now it's scheduled to come out in May. The working title is Un-American. The idea being that I look at the Judeo-Christian principles and compare them to America's founding principles. And the systems are in such conflict that it's fair to say that Judeo-Christianity is un-American.
Do you think they're treating the Constitution like it's a holy text, like as if everything in it is perfect and needs to be adhered to?
Yeah, I mean, that is actually a judicial philosophy called originalism that is very associated with
Scalia.
With Scalia and with conservative religion. And the textual fetish that they have for their holy book bleeds over into the Constitution. I mean, the Constitution's hugely flawed, right? I mean, it's slavery's right in there. It's never mentioned. Right. They went out of their way not to mention it, but I mean, there's massive flaws in it. So
Aaron Ra actually said, I think that the First Amendment contradicts the First Commandment. Which I loved. Yeah,
actually, and so one part of my book goes through each of the 10 commandments and compares them to America's founding principles. One part of the book is called Argument by Idiom, and it goes over "In God We Trust," "So Help Me God," "Under God in the Pledge," and it goes. You mentioned earlier that those were added later. You're right; they were all added later, and not just in response to godless communism, but also in that era there was actually a deliberate attempt to sell religion to the American public. As a way to fight back against Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, which is fascinating, and it goes back to what we were talking about
just to give you some guys. By the way, anyway. We mentioned Europe. Just recently in Philippines, which is one of the most religiously Christian countries in the world, their president Duterte, this is a very Catholic country, but he came out openly said God is stupid. Right? And he also demanded evidence for God. This is the president of one of the most Christian countries in the world.
I wish we had a better representative. So this guy is he's a fucking
terrible
thug. He's such a douche.
But he's a cult of personality himself, because he's not, even though people there are very religious, even after that, he still has their support, which is weird.
Well, it's like Trump, right? I mean, Trump, for everything we know of him, like he's clear. Like they asked him what his favorite. I love this exchange. Like when they asked him, "What's your favorite verse in the Bible?" Yeah, and he's like, well, which part do you like more, New Testament or Old? And he's like, well, I like both. I think they're both great. He's like, what's your favorite verse? I don't want to say. I don't want to propose one verse over the other. Like that's the kind of thing he was saying. Like, he's clearly completely ignorant. We just need better representatives, honestly. So Michael is asking, what is worse at the moment, postmodernistic SJW and neo-Marxism in the universities, or conservative Christian propaganda in primary schools and homeschooling? It's a loaded question. So
the latter, without question. Okay. Yeah, conservative Christianity is a huge. I mean, they're not trying to just infiltrate the public school system. They're actually actively trying to tear the public school system down. And that's because education is a silver bullet when it comes to religion. That's a big part of it. It is, and they used to be careless about this. If you look back at the beginning of the school choice movement and school vouchers, they actually said that we want Jesus to tear down the temple of public education, I think is one of the quotes from the guy who founded what here is called National School Choice Week. So now they make it all about choice and vouchers, and we should just treat private schools the way we treat public schools. But really, their goal is to tear down the system of public education.
Yeah. And one major difference is that they get in earlier, way earlier.
Oh yeah,
it's harder to change minds once you indoctrinate children that early on.
Yeah, no, I mean, they have clubs that go into public schools to rent them out that are dedicated to doing this. If you haven't read Catherine Stewart's book called The Good News Club, it's fascinating and scary about this. And evangelists even talk about the 4 to 14 window. So age 4 to age 14. If you can get them then, you got them for life. They're like the big tobacco companies, get them while they're young.
Wow.
I also have to add that I think, we have these discussions sometimes, we all acknowledge, and I agree that, Islam is a huge problem right now. They're killing a lot of people. There's a lot of overt, sort of very visible cost to life, right?
And not so visible ones even more.
Yeah, not so visible. And I think that it shares a lot of that stuff with Christianity. But here, there are other problems here. Like I'm as a medical professional, as a healthcare professional, I did my residency with a guy who was a PhD in molecular genetics, and he was doing his residency in pathology. And he didn't believe in evolution because he was a Pentecostal Christian.
Wow.
He didn't. And we used to have these arguments. And the problem with that is that if you have an education system where you're not taught to think critically, if you're not, then that is directly related to people falling for conspiracy theories. When you're taught not to think critically, when you're taught with religious indoctrination, if you're told that evolution isn't a fact, then you're going to grow up denying that facts are facts, and you're going to start thinking that conspiracy theories and stuff, that stuff is facts. So there's a very real cost to it. If you don't think that antibiotic resistance, right, is a real example of what evolution is, you are going to kill people. If you're the Pope, the Pope Benedict, when he went into Africa and he talked about, he's like, well, try to avoid condoms. In a place where in some countries,
it's unconscionable.
1 in 4 people have HIV.
I've seen the direct results of it. I've seen the direct results of just saying that. Yeah, it's horrible.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's Christianity and people who are Christian missionaries or even the Pope that that this doesn't have a cost to life. It absolutely does, and it's just as immoral and just as horrendous as some of the overt stuff that you see on TV.
Yeah,
and we should always be mindful of that. I think.
It's not just wars and explosions and suicide bombing. The main costs are usually much more subtle, way less newsworthy, and constantly happening on a massive scale all around the world. Yeah,
I think that's well said.
Yeah.
So let me just move. Oh man, I had lost my place. There's a bunch of questions. Mars, with the potential for Supreme Court justices to be replaced with conservative representatives in the near future. Well, I mean, that's already happening. How much freedom of movement do we have in dealing with rulings that have a religious bias?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about this new crop of judges is that they don't seem to care about precedent the way other judges do. So in the American judicial system, when judges have decided a case previously, that question of law is done, right? They don't have to go back and look at it again. They don't need to readdress that. What you're seeing happening with this crop is they're actually actively going back and looking at those cases and then overturning them. It happened a couple times this last term of the Supreme Court. Obviously, one of the things everybody here is talking about is the Roe versus Wade decision, which allows women to choose when it comes to reproductive rights. That's a precedent that's been around since 1971, and the Supreme Court could just go in and overturn it if they want to. That's very problematic. One of the scary things about Kavanaugh is how extreme he is. This nominee is as far right as you can get, and in terms of his conservative bias. So he's terrifying. So, I mean, I think to answer the question is, there's not a whole lot stopping them once they're on the court from overturning what previous courts have done. Nothing.
Okay. So another, I guess this is related to, they're also talking about the judges. How much influence do those bad judges have on the state level laws? If local authorities still want the separation of state and church, what then? Or I guess that they're saying if local authorities still want state and church to be together, I guess what then?
No, separated. Yeah. No.
Oh, separate. Okay. What the separation of church? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, local jurisdictions can do a lot, and they can do a lot. States can do a lot under their own constitution that the Supreme Court can't touch unless it implicates a right under the U.S. Constitution. So, for instance, the Freedom from Religion Foundation stopped in New Jersey millions of dollars taxpayers' money going to churches to repair churches. The government was just giving the money. We sued under the New Jersey Constitution and stopped that. They're considering now appealing that to the U.S. Supreme Court, saying, well, we have a religious freedom right under the federal Constitution. the U.S. Constitution to access that money. And if the U.S. Supreme Court takes that, and it could then strike down the New Jersey Constitution as a violation of the U.S. Constitution. So that's the way it interplays, and it can be scary. It could be scary with a bad court. It could be really, really scary.
Wow, you guys are needed the most right now than usual. You guys, please, if you're listening to this, go check them out. Ali, you're going to put a link once this comes out.
Yeah. I've been noting it down. I'm going to put it. I mean, this is probably one of the most important things, guests that we've had here. I mean, right. Andrew, so thank you again.
Well, don't say what our other guests might be listening to this.
we love all of our guests. I meant that's what I said. One of the most important. Right, there are many different aspects of this. Right. Okay, so I also want to actually give a shout out to. We have a previous episode with for those who are hearing this, on the audio. A previous episode with Robin Blumner, who is she's the head of CFI, and she talked about secular rescue. So they also have legal services that they provide to people that they're trying to get out of persecuted atheists who are in persecuted countries and persecuted communities, and they help them. They're doing some amazing work as well. And
actually, FFRF works very closely with secular rescue on that too.
Right. I think you mentioned that.
Yeah. Bona Ahmed was just at our office all week, helping Annie Laurie out with that stuff. You know, we do our arm of it is called non-belief relief, and so we do a lot of the funding for that.
Wow,
that program.
So you guys are helping ex-Muslims. You guys are helping ex-Muslims in countries outside of US as well. Absolutely. And one thing we've done for ex-Muslims too, I should have said this earlier on when we were talking about the cakes, is when ex-Muslims of North America was having one of their anniversaries, Wegmans, the grocery store, refused to make their cake.
That's right.
Oh my God, really?
Cake.
I'm the one who fixed that.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Man. Oh, wow. Yeah. That's awesome.
So, okay. So, last question from there's two of them. One more. So would I be correct in saying that the wall between church and state was originally meant for the protection of religious denominations themselves? I understand there was quite a bit of discrimination based on religious faith back then. If so, it's an irony that religious groups today want to tear it down.
No, I mean, that's absolutely right. That is one of the reasons it existed. And if you look historically, some of, for instance, Baptists and Catholics were huge supporters of state-church separation when the United States was found. They were some of the groups that were pushing for it the hardest. One of the Catholic representatives to the House of Representatives, Daniel Carroll, gave one of the greatest quotes in my mind about the freedom of conscience ever. He said that the rights of conscience, our ability to think freely, will little tolerate the lightest touch of the governmental hand. And they absolutely were for separation of state and church. The question is, once they start getting political power, what happens? That flips. And historically, that's the case throughout.
This is why Muslims are pro-secularism in the countries where they're not in power, but they're not pro-secularism when they are in power. Right?
It's a trend that you see everywhere, geographically, and everywhere throughout history.
Right. So last question, Matt M. Is that
Matt M. Do you think that many of the people who identify as Christian are just cultural Christians and actually atheists?
I don't know.
I don't know if they're actually atheists. I think a huge chunk are cultural Christians and would give up a lot of the trappings of Christianity without much of a second thought.
I actually think that's very true of Muslims too. A lot of Muslims, especially, I mean, not only here in the West, but overseas as well.
No, let's not assume that not following your religion means that you're not believing in, you could be a very bad Muslim, but still a Muslim. You could be a very bad Christian, but still a Christian, right? But
I'm seeing this among young people. I'm seeing a lot of cultural Christians and cultural Muslims in a way.
But when you say cultural, it's not about following the rules of your religion. It's about not believing, right? So you could be, you're still a Muslim if you believe in God and Allah, Muhammad as his prophet, and the Quran.
No. I'm talking about people. They're like, I'm Muslim, but I don't think that. I think Muhammad wrote the Quran. I don't think.
So when you say,
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. So when you say cultural Muslim or cultural Christian, you're not talking about them not practicing. In fact, they are practicing, right? But that's what makes them cultural. you're talking about the belief aspect of it that is missing, that makes them not technically Muslim or Christian anymore.
Yeah, this is what my brother calls, he calls it, the slogan is, there is no God and Muhammad is a messenger of God. I'm like, okay. I think,
Matt clarified that by cultural, I mean not believing.
Not believing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and I think one of the biggest hangups probably still, and this is, I think, one of the, we were talking about coming out of the closet and how it has an impact. I think one of the things that does is it debunks this popular myth that has really lodged itself, at least in the American psyche. I don't know where else, or how it's affected elsewhere in the world. But the idea that to be religious is to be a moral person. Ooh. So people don't actually want to come out and say, no, I don't believe in God, because that
one
has
of the
been
greatest cons in human history.
I could not agree more. Right. Because then they feel like they're coming out and saying I'm a bad person. Right. And who's gonna come out and say that? They stole
morality from us. Like,
I know, it's amazing. It was amazing.
What the fuck? Like, okay.
This is kind of interesting. I wanted to, mention one thing. I did an interview with Dan Barker. I think Armin, I don't know if.
Yeah, I was on the Freedom from Religion Foundation
the radio show, right? Radio
show. I was there as a guest. Yeah. I had to refresh my email a couple of times because I got an email from Dan Barker, the invitation. I'm like, what the hell? Wow! This was way before. Like the fact that he paid attention to me, like that was so sweet. I couldn't.
Well, I mean, the work that you guys are doing is absolutely critical. We obviously focus on the United States, but we are also looking to the future and what things are going to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now as the demographics here shift more. Mm-hmm. Where are the future front lines of this? And I think 20, 30 years from now, we're going to have very little work to do here in the States and really have a lot more to do helping you internationally with this fight. And that's certainly, at least on my
you already are with non-belief relief. And I'm so, they're so, I mean, FFRF.
The fact that you guys chair is amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, and they're Andrew. Like, I mean this sincerely. They're very, very fortunate to have him. You're so articulate and so knowledgeable, and I'm really waiting for your book to come out. And you're really passionate. I wanted, since we mentioned IQs earlier on when Richard Dawkins was talking about the well-known fact that the people who are non-religious just happen to have a higher mean IQ than religious people. Just wanted to mention Dan Barker. I don't know if I'm pretty sure he doesn't like publicizing this too much, but he is. He used to be a minister, and then he became an atheist activist. No, he actually has one. He doesn't.
He wrote a book about it. He publicizes it.
Yeah, no, he publicizes that. I'm getting to something else.
Oh, okay.
He actually has one of the highest recorded IQs. He is a member of the Prometheus Society, which is I don't know, it's like the top 0. I don't know what percent, a tiny minority. So he actually has one of the highest recorded IQs out there too, which is really interesting.
I've been told that for the past 3 days that IQs don't tell you anything, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, they don't tell you everything, but they do correlate with a lot of life outcomes. So, and they're somehow correlated with atheists. We haven't really talked about this.
We should have an episode on that, by the way. Right.
Yeah, maybe we should. So, in any case, or not, I don't know. No, but yeah, you know what? Why not?
Yeah.
But in any case, I just wanted to say, Andrew, I mean, you're really, all of the work you're doing is amazing. There are a lot of activists who are doing amazing work. There's a lot of writers. It's increasing. There's community organizers. There are a lot of many organizations out there. But what you're doing is actually going up there, getting in the government's face, and you've sort of dedicated your whole profession to this. And as a lawyer, you could be out doing all kinds of stuff. But the fact that you've chosen to do this is actually really, really admirable. And yeah, I'm just really, really honored to have you here. I really enjoyed this conversation. I thought it was fantastic. I learned a whole lot.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you saying that. I was a
fan, but now you're like a hero to me now. So
yeah, you are. Yeah, absolutely. And
I
just let us
really appreciate that. I definitely will. I'll send you guys a copy, and maybe I'll come back on and we can chat about it again.
Oh yeah.
We would definitely.
The topic would be different. The topic would be the Judeo-Christian values.
We can do it.
Yeah. Because you know what, the reason I'm actually itching that when you told me about your book, I was like, okay, I need to read this, is because the reason I wrote my book, it was almost involuntary. The problem is I was hearing this this dialogue, and nobody was talking about this one perspective. And I was like, why isn't anybody talking about it? And that's why I wrote it. And I think what you're writing about is just something I hear both sides of all the time, but nobody's actually
said. It's very timely. It's becoming a major thing.
It's very timely. Nobody's actually sat down and addressed this. And like, okay, we've had enough Facebook comment threads with this kind of conversation. Let's write a fucking book about it and get it out there so people can, This
is why I wrote Why There Is No God, because
exactly.
Yeah. I just wanted to have all the arguments in one book.
You got to get it out.
Yeah. Now every time somebody comes and tells me like, let me give you a proof that you've never heard before, I'm like, I heard that a million times. Here's a PDF that is at my book. Go read it.
Anyway, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to take too much of your time, but just stay on for a little bit while we. Do you have anything else to say?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. It was a real pleasure coming on and chatting with you. And I'm happy to come back and do this anytime you guys want to. So definitely for the book.
We will. We're definitely going to do it for the book. Can you tell people where to find you? Like where are you online? FFRF links? Anything you want to just mention?
Yes. So if you want to help FFRF out, we are at ffrf.org. We're a membership-driven organization. We go strictly on membership fees. We don't really do fundraisers or anything like that. We have a convention, but we don't make any money off it. And then I'm Andrew L. Seidel on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Everywhere where you can be, that's my handle.
Links.
Okay.
Once the YouTube and the podcast version of this comes out, the links to all of this is going to be in the description.
In the description,
And thank you to the live chat people. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mars. Thank you, Matt. You guys. This was
lots of M's today.
I should. So I haven't been good in announcing things a week ahead. I have 6 full-time jobs now, so I'm gonna get better at that. But sorry,
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Live long and prosper, Michael.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.